The call came in at 8:14 on a Tuesday morning, and I almost didn't answer it. I was standing at the kitchen counter in my apartment in Duluth, still in my coat, bag on the floor, coffee I hadn't started yet. My phone buzzed against the tile, and I saw my mother's name and picked it up without thinking, the way you do when you've spent your whole life answering. "Your grandmother's 85th is the Saturday before Thanksgiving," she said. "We're doing it at the house. Dinner, the whole family. I need to know if you're coming." I told her I was coming.
"Good," she said.
"We're doing a slideshow. Bring something if you have something." She hung up before I said anything else. I stood there for a moment with the phone in my hand. The radiator clicked on. Outside the window, the lake was gray and flat, the kind of flat it gets in early November when the light pulls back and everything just waits. I set the phone down and finally started the coffee. I had lived in Duluth for 4 years by then. I'd moved from Green Bay after I finished my second licensing exam and took a position at a civil engineering firm on Superior Street. Small firm, 6 people, the kind of place where you learned everything or you didn't last. I had lasted. I had made associate in 14 months, which the senior partner, a quiet man named Arn, told me was faster than anyone he'd brought on in 20 years. I didn't tell my family that. I mentioned it once to my mother on the phone and she said, "That's nice, honey," and asked if I was seeing anyone. I was 31. My name was Maren Brandt. My sister Cecilie was 34 and lived 12 minutes from our parents' house in Stillwater. She worked in marketing for a regional hospital group, a job she'd had for 7 years and described at every family gathering in slightly different terms depending on who was listening. To our aunts, she managed communications. To our father, she ran the department. To me, once, when we were alone in the kitchen at Christmas, she said she mostly handled the newsletter. We had never been close in the way that people mean when they say sisters are close. We were polite. We remembered each other's birthdays. At family dinners, we sat at the same table and talked around each other with the particular efficiency of people who have had a great deal of practice at it. What I understood, though I had never said it plainly, was that Cecilie had built her place in the family on a set of coordinates that required mine to be smaller. She was the one who lived nearby. She was the one who came to things. She was the one who helped. Those were real things, true things, and I didn't begrudge them. But over the years, they had hardened into something else, into a story the family told itself where her presence was the whole of what had been given, and my distance was the whole of what had been withheld. Our father was a quiet man who had worked 30 years in commercial lending and believed, with a certainty so deep he never had to state it, that proximity was loyalty. He loved both of us. I believed that then, and I believe it now. But he expressed love the way his own father had, through small material acknowledgments, a check at Christmas, a call on the birthday, a nod across the dinner table, and what he withheld from those gestures meant more to him than what he gave. He had never withheld the nod from Cecilie. There was one other thing, though I had not spoken of it to anyone in the family, and I did not intend to. My grandmother had come to me 2 years after I moved to Duluth, a phone call, early on a Saturday morning, and asked me, plainly and without preamble, if I would be willing to help in ways I could. She had said, just as plainly, that she would not ask again, and that whatever I did or didn't do would remain between us. She was 76 then. I was 25. I said yes without hesitating. A few weeks later, she mailed me a plain business envelope. Inside was a handwritten note with her accountant's address and a sentence that said, "He'll know what to do." I had set the envelope on my kitchen table and looked at it for a long time before I called. After that, every first of the month for 9 years, I transferred what I could from my account in Duluth to the account the accountant maintained on the family's behalf. In the early years, it was modest, 400, sometimes 6. As my income grew, it grew with it. I kept a spreadsheet on my laptop, a plain one, updated on the first of every month, with the date and the amount, and a one-line note on what it was for. Nobody had ever seen it. I had not shown it to anyone. There was nothing in me that wanted credit for it. I had wanted my grandmother to have what she needed, and my parents to have what they needed, and I had wanted to do it from a distance because distance was what I had to give. I drove down from Duluth on the Friday before the party. 5 hours with a stop in Hinckley for gas and a coffee I didn't finish. I pulled into my parents' driveway on Elm Creek Road at 4:30, the sky already going dark, the maple in the front yard stripped down to its last few leaves. My mother met me at the door. "You look tired," she said. "Long drive," I said. She let me in and took my coat, and I carried my bag upstairs to my old room, which had been reorganized at some point in the last year into something between a guest room and a craft storage space. The bed was still there. I sat on the edge of it and looked at the window and listened to the house settle around me. Downstairs, I could hear Cecilie's voice, already talking. I came down 20 minutes later and found the kitchen full. My mother at the stove. My Aunt Sigrid at the counter, slicing bread. My father standing near the back door with a glass of water, talking to Cecilie's husband, Dale, who sold insurance and had a gift for making every room feel slightly smaller. Cecilie was at the kitchen table with her laptop open, managing the slideshow. "There she is," my mother said. I went to my grandmother first. She was in her chair by the window, the same chair she'd occupied at every family gathering for 20 years, a high-backed thing in green fabric that I associated entirely with her. She took my hands when I leaned down and held them for a moment, longer than the gesture required. "Maren," she said.
Just that.
"Happy early birthday, Grandma," I said. She looked at me with the careful attention of someone who has watched a family for 85 years and learned to read what doesn't get said. She didn't let go of my hands right away. "You came a long way," she said. "I wanted to," I said. She patted my hand once and let go. I straightened up and turned to the room, and my father gave me the nod. Cecilie glanced up from the laptop. "I need a photo from you," she said. "For the slideshow. Something with Grandma." "I'll find one," I said. "I need it tonight. I'm finishing it tonight." "Okay," I said. "I'll find one tonight." She looked back at the screen. My father went back to talking to Dale. I got a glass of water and stood near the window and watched the room move around my grandmother, who sat in her chair and accepted it all with the patience of someone who has long since stopped needing to be at the center of things to feel the warmth of them. Dinner that night was quieter than the party would be. 7 of us around the kitchen table, my grandmother at the head. My mother had made the pot roast she made every year for this occasion, the one with the carrots that went soft and the gravy that my father said no one else had ever gotten right. She had been making it for 30 years. I sat across from Cecilie. Dale was to her left. My father was at the other end from my grandmother, and my Aunt Sigrid and her husband Tor were between us on the long side. "Maren's at a firm up in Duluth," my mother said, to no one in particular, the way she sometimes narrated the family to itself. "Civil engineering," my father said, in a tone that could have meant anything. "Infrastructure," I said. "Roads, drainage, site work mostly." "She made associate," my mother added. My father said. Cecilie reached for the bread. "That's great," she said, without looking up. Tor asked me something about the lake effect snow, and I talked about that for a while, and the dinner moved on. After a few minutes, Dale asked about the roads up north, whether I had snow tires, whether I'd had any close calls on the highway coming down. I told him about the stretch north of Hinckley where the wind comes off the fields and the plows can't keep up, and he nodded the way people nod when they want to seem like they're listening but are already thinking about what they'll say next. "It's a long drive to make on your own," Cecilie said. "Every time." "I don't mind driving," I said. "Still." She reached for the salt. "It's a lot." I didn't say anything to that. My grandmother had been quiet for most of the meal, which was not unusual. She ate slowly and watched the table with the particular attention of someone who finds more in the watching than in the talking. She had been that way my entire life. When I was small, I used to think she was bored. By the time I was a teenager, I understood she was just paying a different kind of attention than everyone else. "You'll drive back Sunday?" my father said, when there was a pause.
"Sunday morning," I said.
"Early." "You don't have to leave early," my mother said. "I know," I said. "I have a site visit Monday morning. Early start."
My father looked at me.
Something moved behind his eyes that I had learned, over the years, not to try to name. "Duluth treating you well," he said. It was not quite a question.
"It is," I said.
"I like the work."
"Good," he said.
And then he went back to his plate. Cecilie poured more water for Dale and refilled her own glass and said something to Sigrid about the slideshow, how many photos she'd found from the 70s, how she'd had to scan a few from prints. She had been putting it together for 3 weeks, she said. She'd been calling relatives for photos. She tracked down a shot of my grandmother at 22 that no one in the immediate family had seen. That was a lot of work, Sigrid said. I didn't mind, Cecilie said. I listened and ate my pot roast and didn't say anything. After the dishes were cleared and my grandmother had gone to bed and Sigrid and Tor had driven back to their hotel, I was alone in the kitchen with my mother, drying the pot she handed me. She's been asking about you, my mother said. Grandma? She asks every time I talk to her. Where's Maren? What's Maren doing? She handed me another pot. I think she worries. She doesn't need to worry, I said. I know that, my mother said. But she does. I dried the pot and set it on the counter. I found a photo, I said, for the slideshow. Grandma and me on the dock at the cabin, maybe 12 years ago. I'll send it to Cecilie before I go to sleep. She'll be pleased, my mother said. She worked hard on it. I know, I said. My mother handed me another pot, and I dried it and didn't say anything else, and after a moment, she started talking about the party, how many people were coming, whether the tables would fit in the dining room, and I listened and dried what she handed me until the kitchen was clean. The Saturday of the party arrived cold and clear. By 11 in the morning there were cars on both sides of Elm Creek Road, and the house was full in the particular way it gets full only at Brandt family gatherings, every horizontal surface with something on it, every room with its own conversation running, the sound of it overlapping until it became a kind of weather. I had been up since 7. I had driven to the grocery store in Stillwater before 8 to pick up the extra folding chairs my mother had forgotten to collect from her friend Ruth's garage. I loaded them into my car and drove them back and set them up in the dining room, 6 chairs, while Cecilie was still upstairs getting ready. Then I drove back out to pick up the cake, because the bakery had called to say they needed someone to collect it before 10, and my mother's hands were full. I got back at 9:40 with the cake in the back seat, drove carefully the whole way, and carried it into the kitchen and set it on the counter. That's the one, my mother said. That's exactly right. My grandmother came into the kitchen and looked at it. Too much frosting, she said. It's your birthday, my mother said. It's still too much, my grandmother said, but she was smiling. I stood at the counter and watched them and felt something move through my chest, quiet and without a name. An hour later, when the first wave of relatives had arrived, I was back in the car, this time driving to a gas station 3 miles away because my Uncle Bjorn had arrived with a car that had a slow leak and no spare and needed a can of Fix-A-Flat to get him through the weekend. I found one, paid for it, drove it back, handed it to Bjorn in the driveway. You're a lifesaver, he said. Don't worry about it, I said. I went back inside and washed my hands and tied an apron around my waist and spent the next hour and a half in the kitchen with my mother, carrying trays, refilling things, keeping the table supplied as the first guests moved through. Cecilie came downstairs at noon in a dress I recognized from a photo she'd posted in September. She moved through the room the way she always did at family gatherings, efficiently, visibly, with the particular ease of someone who has never had to wonder if they belong. She kissed relatives. She directed people to the food. She stood beside my father at the right moments and laughed at the right things. She did not go near the kitchen. At 2 o'clock, when the dining room was full and the noise had reached its peak and my grandmother was at the center of the table with her cake in front of her and 40-odd relatives arranged around and behind her, I was standing near the doorway to the kitchen with a dish towel in my hand. Pastor Lindqvist was there. He had been my grandmother's pastor for 19 years, a tall, spare man in his late 60s with white hair and the particular stillness of someone who has spent a lifetime listening to people in difficult rooms. He had driven in from Bayport that morning. He sat near the far end of the table and ate quietly and said little, and several people spoke to him throughout the afternoon with the particular care you bring to someone whose opinion you have decided in advance to trust. The cake was cut. My grandmother made her wish. Cecilie stood beside her for the photograph. After the cake, when the noise had softened and people had moved into smaller conversations and the table had partially cleared, my father stood and said he wanted to say a few words. He talked about my grandmother, about her 85 years, about the family she had built. He talked about what it had meant to him to raise a family in Stillwater, close to her, within driving distance. He talked about Cecilie, about what it meant to have someone nearby, someone who showed up. He said Cecilie was the one who held the family together. He said he didn't know what they would do without her. He didn't say my name. I stood in the doorway with the dish towel and let that land where it landed. Several people applauded. My Uncle Bjorn raised his glass. My grandmother thanked my father with a small nod, the economical kind she reserved for things she had expected. I looked at the table. I looked at my father's face as he sat back down, the quiet satisfaction in it, the completeness. He had said what he meant to say. He had shaped the room into the shape he wanted. In that shape, Cecilie was at the center, and I was at the edge, and that was simply how things were, not from cruelty, I knew that, but from years of habit solidified into belief. I set the dish towel over my shoulder. I didn't move. Then Cecilie stood. She looked around the table with the expression she used when she was about to say something she had prepared. She said she just wanted to add something. She said this family meant everything to her. She said she knew not everyone found it easy to prioritize family. She said it exactly like that, prioritize family, and that she was grateful she'd always been able to. She looked across the room when she said it. She looked at me. 12 years, she said, to the table, conversationally, as though she were finishing a thought she'd started somewhere else. 12 years I've been the one, at every birthday, every holiday, every hard moment. That's not a complaint. That's just what it looks like when you actually show up for people. My father nodded. My mother looked at her plate. 40 relatives were quiet. My grandmother looked at me from the head of the table. Her hands were folded in her lap, and her expression was the one she wore when she was waiting for something to finish. I looked back at Cecilie. Her chin was slightly lifted. There was a small, composed smile on her face, the kind that arrives when someone has said the thing they came to say. I set the dish towel on the counter behind me. I didn't say anything. My cousin Eric, at the near end of the table, looked at me and then quickly looked away. My Aunt Sigrid's expression had gone neutral in the particular way of someone who has heard something they wish they hadn't but don't intend to say so. My mother was still looking at her plate. Cecilie sat back down with the composed ease of someone who has finished a thing they'd prepared for and found it went as planned. The room settled back into its noise. Someone 2 tables over started a new conversation. My cousin Eric refilled his glass. The moment passed the way moments do, when everyone has agreed, without speaking, to let it pass. But my grandmother had not moved. And from the far end of the table, I heard the quiet sound of a fork being set down. Then Pastor Lindqvist, at the far end of the table, set down his fork. He placed his napkin beside his plate. He pushed back his chair and stood, slowly, with the unhurried ease of a man who has stood in front of rooms his entire adult life and has never once needed to raise his voice to fill one. He looked at Cecilie. "Sit down, please," he said. The room went still in a way that was different from the quiet before. Cecilie's smile held for 1 second, then 2, and then it didn't. Pastor Lindqvist reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a sealed manila folder. He set it on the table in front of him. He did not open it. He placed one hand flat on top of it and looked around the table at no one in particular and said, "Before this evening ends, there are some things this family should hear." I stood in the doorway. My grandmother unfolded her hands in her lap. My sister sat down. The room stayed quiet for longer than rooms usually stay quiet. Pastor Lindqvist didn't move. His hand remained flat on the manila folder. He wasn't looking at Cecilie anymore. He was looking at my grandmother, and whatever passed between them in that moment was the kind of thing that happens between 2 people who have known each other for 19 years and don't need words to confirm it. I was still standing in the doorway. My Aunt Sigrid, across the table, had set down her fork. My father's expression had gone careful in the way it went careful when something was happening that he hadn't arranged. I looked at the folder. I looked at Pastor Lindqvist's hand on top of it. I walked to the kitchen. I set the dish towel on the counter. I stood at the sink for a moment with the water running cold over my hands and the sound of the dining room behind me, muffled and still. I turned the water off. I dried my hands. I walked back. I stood in the doorway again. Pastor Lindqvist had not sat down. I've known Ruth Brandt for 19 years, he said. He set it to the table, unhurried, the way he might open a Sunday reading. Not performing, just beginning. She asked me, some months ago, to hold something for her. She asked me to bring it tonight. She was specific about tonight. My grandmother, at the head of the table, said nothing. Her hands were folded again. Her eyes were on Pastor Lindqvist with the expression of someone watching something they set in motion a long time ago finally arrive. Cecilie said, "What is this?" "Let him finish," my grandmother said. Quietly.
Once.
Cecilie closed her mouth. Pastor Lindqvist looked down at the folder.
He did not open it yet.
He said, "Over the past several years, a number of things have been said in this family about who contributes and who doesn't. About who shows up and who stays away. I'm not here to assign blame for that. But Ruth asked me to make sure that before she turned 85, her family understood the full picture." My father said, "Eric, let him finish," my grandmother said again, in exactly the same tone. My father sat back. Pastor Lindqvist opened the folder. Inside were 2 documents, paper clipped together, and a handwritten note on top. He lifted the note first and held it so the table could see the handwriting without reading it. Then he set it in front of my grandmother, facing her, as though returning something that belonged to her. Then he turned the first document over and laid it on the table. "This is a summary," he said, "prepared by your grandmother's accountant, of financial contributions made to this household over the past 9 years. He slid it toward the center of the table. My Uncle Bjorn leaned forward. My Aunt Sigrid picked it up, looked at it, and passed it left without speaking. It moved around the table the way things move when a room has gone too quiet to do anything but follow the nearest instruction. When it reached my father, he held it for a moment.
I watched his eyes go to the top line.
I watched them stop there. He looked up at me. I didn't look away. 9 years, Pastor Lindqvist said. Beginning the spring after Maren finished her second licensing exam and started working. Monthly. Without announcement. The total is on the last line. The document reached Cecilie. She took it with the careful movements of someone who already suspects what they're going to find.
She looked at the top.
She looked at the bottom. A line appeared between her eyebrows that I had never seen there before. The total was $412,000. It had gone toward the house repairs after the basement flooded in 2019. The estimate from Halverson Waterproofing had been $18,400, and Maren had covered it in full. It had covered 3 years of my grandmother's supplemental insurance premiums after Medicare stopped covering her physical therapy, $1,140 a month, 36 months, every payment on time. It had made up the difference when my father's hours were reduced at the bank in 2021 and the mortgage payment came up short 2 months running. It had paid, quietly and without discussion, for the things that needed paying for, sent from a Duluth apartment by a woman who had been described, 20 minutes ago, as someone who didn't prioritize family. Cecilie set the document on the table. The room waited. "That's not," she started.
She stopped.
She tried again. "I didn't know about this." "No," Pastor Lindqvist said gently. "You weren't meant to." "But why wouldn't she?" Cecilie looked at me. "Why didn't you say anything?" I looked at her for a moment. My hands were still at my sides. "You told this room," I said, "that showing up means being in a room." Cecilie said nothing. "You've been in a room," I said. "I don't take that away from you. But I was here too. I was here every month for 9 years, in the only way I knew how to be, and I didn't ask anyone to notice." "That's not the same thing," Cecilie said. Her voice had changed register, not angry, something smaller than angry. Uncertain. Being physically present is different. Anyone can write a check. I let that sit for a moment. A chair scraped somewhere at the far end of the table. No one spoke. Around the table the relatives had gone very still. Not the polite stillness of people waiting for a speech to end, but something else, the stillness of people who have understood that what they are watching is not a performance. My Uncle Bjorn had his hands flat on the table. My Aunt Sigrid was looking at the document, which had made its way around the full circle and come to rest near the center. My father had not looked up from it since he first read it. "You told this family," I said, "that 12 years of showing up was the whole of what mattered. I paused. You told Grandma's table that not everyone finds it easy to prioritize family. I paused. I've been prioritizing this family since I was 22 years old, and I did it without asking to be thanked for it. My father was looking at the document again. I could see his jaw working. Cecilie said, "That isn't fair. I was here. I was the one they called. When the furnace went out last January, I was the one who drove over at 10 at night. When Dad had his procedure, I sat in that waiting room for 4 hours. You weren't here for any of that." "No," I said. "I wasn't. So how is that equal?" "I didn't say it was equal," I said. "I said I was here. Both things can be true." Cecilie looked at me. Her chin was not lifted now. "You should have said something," she said. "Years ago." "You should have," she stopped. Started again. "Why would you do all of that and say nothing?" "Because it wasn't for the room," I said. "It was for them." I picked up the handwritten note from in front of my grandmother. She watched me do it. I turned it over. It said, *, you already knew. Grandma, *. I folded it once and put it in my pocket. I looked at Cecilie for the last time. 12 years, I said. That was the only thing that was true. I walked to the front closet. I got my coat. I went out the front door and pulled it closed behind me without sound. The drive back to Duluth took 5 hours and 20 minutes. I stopped once, in Hinckley, the same gas station as the drive down. I got a coffee and sat in the parking lot for a few minutes with the engine running and the heater on and the dark flat fields on either side of the highway going nowhere in particular. My phone stayed quiet until I was back on 35 heading north. Then it rang. My grandmother's number. I picked up. "Maren," she said. "I'm here," I said. "Are you driving?" "Yes." "I'll be quick then." She paused. "I should have done that years ago. I want you to know I understand that." "You did it when you were ready," I said. "I did it when I was 85, she said, with a dryness that had always been her truest register. "That's not the same thing." I almost smiled. "No," I said. "I suppose it's not." She was quiet for a moment. Outside the window the pines had started, the first real ones, the ones that meant I was getting close to home. "Your father called me," she said, "after you left. He sat with me for a while." "What did he say?" "Not much," she said. "He's not good with words when he's been wrong. He never was. But he sat there and that was something."
I thought about that.
"And Cecilie?" I asked. Another pause. She cried. My grandmother said, "For a long time." I let her. And then I told her that love that needs to be the only love in the room isn't love, it's inventory. She paused again.
She didn't like that.
"No," I said. "She wouldn't. She'll come around," my grandmother said. "Or she won't. But either way, you don't have to keep being invisible to make room for her." I drove for a moment without speaking. "Thank you," I said. "For the folder. For Pastor Lindqvist.
He's a good man," she said.
He kept it safe for 8 months. Never asked a single question. 8 months. "I've been planning this since March," she said. I did smile then. Alone in the car with the heater running and the pines going past in the dark. "Get home safe," my grandmother said. "I will," I said. She hung up. I drove the rest of the way north with the radio off and the heater on, and the road unreeling ahead of me, through the pine dark and the lake dark and back into the city where I lived, where I had made something real, where I had been the whole of myself without anyone watching. The fields gave way to the first subdivisions north of the Twin Cities metro. Then the fields again, flatter, darker. Then the long corridor of pine that meant the north had started in earnest. I had driven this stretch enough times that I knew it by feel, by the way the road curved through the trees and the light changed and the air through the vents went colder. It had always felt like the road was returning me to something rather than taking me away from it. I pulled into my parking spot on Superior Street at 1:30 in the morning. I sat in the car for a moment after the engine went off. The folder was on the passenger seat. I hadn't opened it again. I didn't need to. I knew the numbers. I took the handwritten note out of my coat pocket and looked at it one more time in the light from the parking garage. * you already knew. Grandma, *. I put it back. I got out of the car. I went upstairs. I made the coffee I hadn't made that morning for days ago, when the phone rang and all of this began. This story was developed by the Revenge Signal writing and production team. This story is fictional and was made entirely for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real persons or events is coincidental. Maren Brandt drove home. She made her coffee. She went to work on Monday and did the work she was good at, and nobody at the office knew anything had changed. That was the only thing that was true.